What if the way they treat you is just your mind echoing back at you? What if the conflict you thought was personal is actually vibrational? What if you've never truly met them, only met the version of them shaped by your own state of being? There are moments in life when someone's behavior hits us like a wave we didn't see coming. Coldness, where we expected warmth. Distance, where we gave closeness. Rejection, where we offered presence. And we internalize it, blaming ourselves or them. But what if the truth was far more subtle and far more powerful? Imagine a woman who for years felt invisible to her partner. No matter how much she tried to be supportive, loving, or kind, he remained emotionally distant. She thought she had two choices, to confront or to give up. But what she did instead changed everything. Not through words, not through action, but through silence. Not the silence of avoidance, but the silence of inner recalibration. She changed the way she saw him, the way she felt about him, the way she spoke to him internally. And in a few weeks, without drama or demands, he started treating her differently, gently, curiously, respectfully, as if something in her presence had become undeniable. That story is not rare. It's not magic, and it's not manipulation. It's a glimpse into one of the most overlooked truths of human experience. You don't change others by force, you change them by frequency. This is not a video about mind control. It's not about making people behave the way you want. It's about understanding that your consciousness is not passive. It is a magnet, a mirror, a tuning fork. It broadcasts signals even when your lips are sealed, and the universe, including every person around you, responds. We're going to dive deep into the laws of attention, the psychology of perception, the neuroscience of emotion, the power of unspoken identity, and what it really means to transform the field around you. By first transforming the field within you, we'll explore why what you focus on expands, why your mental conversations shape your relationships more than your words ever could, why your emotional state becomes the filter that defines what kind of world and what kind of people show up in your life. You're not just a thinker, you're not just a feeler, you're an emitter, and everything in your life is responding to that signal. In this video, we're not talking about tactics, we're talking about transformation. Not persuasion, but presence. Not scripting others, but rewriting your own signal. The people in your life aren't here to obey you, they're here to reflect you. And once you understand that, you'll never look at them the same way again. Your world is not reacting to what you do, it's reflecting what you are. That's the first truth most people will never be told, and yet, once seen, it can never be unseen. Every interaction, every silence, every gesture you receive from someone else is not random, not mechanical, and certainly not separate from you. It's a reflection, not of your worth, but of your state. And when you start paying attention to that invisible mechanism, everything begins to make a strange kind of sense. You realize the behaviors you thought were independent, the coldness of a partner, the resistance of a coworker, the disconnection in a friendship, were all shaped, not just by the other, but by the subtle instructions your consciousness was issuing in the background, instructions you didn't even know you were giving. Because you are not a fixed identity, you are a broadcasting field. Your thoughts, emotions, and expectations don't stay inside your head. They shape what you perceive, filter what you allow, and call forth matching frequencies from the people around you. And what you call their behavior is often just a response to the field you've been holding. It's not easy to hear this, especially if you've been hurt, especially if you've been overlooked, mistreated, or misunderstood. You might feel like this insight invalidates your experience, as if you're being told that it was your fault. But that's not what this is. This isn't about blame, it's about awareness. The kind of awareness that sets you free. Because once you understand that people reflect your inner assumptions, you gain the ability to rewrite the entire interaction without saying a word. You stop trying to control outcomes on the outside and start shifting the signal on the inside. Think about it. How many times have you expected someone to act a certain way, and then they did, almost like they were playing a role in your mental script? You assume someone won't listen and they don't. You prepare for distance and they pull away. You fear disapproval and suddenly you're met with indifference or critique. Not because you're manifesting pain for yourself, but because you're energetically preparing the conditions for that version of the other person to appear. You're casting them into a role based on your state, and like good actors in the field of resonance, they fulfill it. That's the mirror effect, not as a metaphor, as a mechanism. Consciousness is not passive. It's the source code behind reality, the structure behind interaction, the invisible prompt that tells others how to be in your presence. And when you shift that inner prompt, the lines they deliver begin to change. Their tone changes. Their presence changes. Their very identity, as you experience it, begins to morph, not because they were manipulated, but because the projection they were reflecting has been revised. This is why some people trigger the best in others, while others only evoke the worst. It's not about charm, it's about state, it's about what you expect to find, what you silently accept, what you unconsciously authorize. If you see yourself as insignificant, people will unknowingly mirror that. If you carry the imprint of rejection, others will play that out for you. If you carry unprocessed rage, they'll meet it with defensiveness. But if you begin to hold yourself differently, not just in posture but in perception, the entire tone of your life starts to reorganize. And this is where most people get stuck. They try to change the world without changing the lens. They try to change others without changing the field in which others appear. They attempt to argue, convince, manipulate, or retreat, all while keeping the same internal blueprint that summoned the experience in the first place. And so nothing shifts. Patterns repeat. Lessons get louder. Until something finally breaks, or awakens. And awakening isn't some mystical moment that arrives with fireworks and clarity. Sometimes it's a quiet pause. A realization that the person you've been trying to change is simply responding to a version of you that you've outgrown. Their version you no longer wish to carry. That's when the mirror softens. That's when you become conscious enough to stop reacting and curious enough to start observing. You ask, what part of me keeps generating this? What unspoken expectation am I still repeating? What version of this person am I feeding with my focus? And then the power returns to you. Not the power to control others, but the power to become the presence that rewrites the room without speaking. To become the observer who dissolves the role, not by fighting it, but by no longer believing it. Because you're not here to prove yourself to others. You're here to project something different, something whole, something coherent, something magnetic. When you truly understand that people are not fixed characters but reflections, you'll stop trying to decode their behavior and start decoding your own frequency. Because what you perceive outside isn't just interaction, it's feedback. And the universe is always responding, not to who you pretend to be, but to who you are, silently, consistently, vibrationally. You don't change others by force, you change others by frequency. And the moment your frequency changes, so does the reflection. You've been scripting them without knowing it, and they've been acting it out with absolute precision. Every relationship, every repeated dynamic, every emotional déjà vu you experience with someone isn't just habit or coincidence. It's programming. Silent, invisible, unconscious programming. Not of them, but of your own mind. Because every time you expect a reaction, every time you replay a memory, every time you mentally predict what someone will say or do, you're handing them a script, a role, a vibrational instruction sheet, and if they're close enough to be in your field, they'll follow it. Not because they're being controlled, but because that's what resonance does. It synchronizes, it aligns, it mirrors. This is one of the most subtle and powerful ways you shape reality without lifting a finger. The beliefs you hold about people don't stay in your head. They become behavioral templates, fields of suggestion, emotional atmospheres. And if you hold them tightly enough, long enough, they crystallize into identity projections. You no longer see someone. You interact with a version of them you've constructed internally. And if that version is disrespectful, cold, distant, or disappointing, they will begin to embody that version, not because it's who they are, but because it's the only version you keep feeding energetically. Every assumption is an assignment. Every emotion is a command. Every repetition is a rehearsal. You've been scripting people, not out loud but vibrationally, and they've been responding accordingly. Now pause. Really take that in. Because once you realize this, you stop being surprised when the same old pattern shows up. You stop being confused when different people evoke the same emotional reaction. You stop asking, "Why does this always happen to me?" and start asking the real question, "What version of them have I been silently expecting?" You begin to see that your relationships aren't happening to you, they're being co-authored from within you. Not in a way that dismisses the other person's agency, but in a way that honors your field's influence. People may have free will, but your consciousness determines which aspects of their identity are most likely to emerge in your presence. The insecure version, the defensive version, the closed-off version, or the compassionate one, the respectful one, the version that meets you from the same emotional altitude you've chosen to occupy. That's why the work isn't about convincing others to treat you better. It's about identifying the inner role you've been assigning them and changing the script, not by force, but by recognition, by realizing how many times you've rehearsed their reaction in your head before they ever open their mouth, how many times you've imagined them being cruel or distant, and how precisely they matched that image. How often you've carried conversations mentally, preparing for the worst and then walked straight into it. This is not your fault. It's your programming, and it's ready to be updated. Because the moment you stop feeding the old version, the one you created from pain, trauma, or fear, you free them. You release them from the role you didn't mean to assign, and that's when something extraordinary happens. A new behavior emerges, a softness where there was tension, a curiosity where there was resistance, a kindness that doesn't seem to make logical sense, because now you're interacting with a different version of them, one that can only exist in the presence of your new perception. This is why internal change is more powerful than external confrontation. When you shift what you're projecting, you shift what's possible. The script dissolves, the roles get rewritten. The relationship reorganizes itself, not because you demanded it, but because you aligned with a different frequency, one that no longer supports the old pattern, one that no longer participates in the same emotional loop. And you don't have to explain it. You don't have to tell them the shift is silent, but the results are not, because the people around you will start to sense the change. They'll feel the absence of resistance, the absence of emotional rehearsal, the absence of mental conflict. And in that space, something new will emerge, something you couldn't have forced but could only attract. You are always assigning roles. The question is, are those assignments coming from your past or your presence? The conversations you're having inside your mind are shaping your relationships more than the ones you're having out loud. You may think that what matters most is what you say, how you react, the boundaries you set, the clarity of your words. But long before any of that happens, a script is being written in silence, a script that starts in your inner dialogue. And this inner dialogue is not innocent. It's not just venting, it's not just processing. It's creation, it's rehearsal, it's energetic architecture. You're talking to them constantly, not with your mouth but with your mind, replaying their last words, predicting their next move, defending yourself in arguments that haven't happened yet, imagining how they'll hurt you again, visualizing them finally understanding you, whispering affirmations, reciting complaints, apologizing to yourself on their behalf. And all of this, every mental exchange, every inner conversation, becomes a broadcast, a vibrational message, a template for behavior. Your mind is not a sealed chamber, it's a transmitter. Every emotionally charged internal dialogue you sustain becomes an instruction to the field. You're telling reality what story you're in. You're telling your relationships what roles to play. And you're doing it all before a single word is spoken. That's why some conflicts never seem to end, even when you think you've moved on. Because the conversation continued inside you. That's why the same dynamic keeps repeating, even when you've said, never again. Because the loop never stopped spinning mentally. That's why people respond to your tension before you express it, because they can feel the residue of the dialogue you've been rehearsing in your head. You think they're reacting to what you said. They're not. They're reacting to what you've been saying inside, to the emotional atmosphere you carry, to the unseen tone of your presence. Because you can say all the right words, But if your internal dialogue is still saturated with fear, resentment, defensiveness, or pain, your energy will leak that story into the room, and people will feel it, whether they understand it or not. This is not about policing your thoughts. It's about owning your influence. It's about realizing that your mental conversations aren't private. They're magnetic. They shape how safe or unsafe others feel in your presence. They affect the level of openness, resistance, warmth, or detachment that people reflect back to you. Not because they're reading your mind, but because they're feeling your signal. So if you want someone's behavior to change, start by listening to how you speak to them internally. Not just the words, but the emotion underneath. Do you talk to them with hope or with disappointment? With clarity or confusion? With compassion or accusation? Do you imagine yourself in connection or in conflict? Are you relating to them through your past or through the potential of something new? The stories you tell yourself about someone define the version of them that becomes possible in your life. And sometimes we are clinging so tightly to an old story that even when the person is ready to change, they can't. Not because they won't, but because we don't allow a new version of them to exist in our minds. It takes courage to rewrite your inner script, especially when you've been hurt, especially when trust has been broken, especially when disappointment has built a fortress around your heart. But if you don't rewrite it, you'll relive it. You'll replay the same conversation again and again, in different bodies, in different settings, with different names, but always echoing the same emotional truth. What you keep rehearsing, you keep recreating. So the practice begins here, not in the external confrontation, not in waiting for them to act differently, but in gently, consistently reprogramming the conversation within, shifting your tone, inviting a new outcome, holding a new vision, speaking as if the change already happened, because energetically it already has. And when your inner dialogue becomes aligned with the reality you wish to experience, the outer world will start to follow. People will say you've changed, that something feels different about you, that they feel more seen, more safe, more drawn to you. But the truth is, they've simply stopped playing the role you've stopped assigning them. The mind is not just for remembering, it's for redesigning. Speak wisely within it, because someone somewhere is already feeling the version of themselves you keep repeating. The universe doesn't speak English, or Portuguese, or any human language. It speaks energy, and whether you know it or not, you are always speaking to it. There is no such thing as silence in the field of consciousness. Even when you're not talking, you're transmitting. Even when your mouth is closed, your vibration is speaking. Loudly, clearly, consistently. You are broadcasting your dominant emotional tone at all times, and the people around you, just like the field itself, are tuning into that frequency and responding accordingly. That's why some people seem to get you instantly, while others never quite connect. Why some days flow with ease and others feel like resistance pressing against your chest. It's not because of the events themselves, it's because of the frequency you're broadcasting, and what that frequency is calling back to you. We've been conditioned to believe that communication is about words, but long before language existed, something deeper was at play. Before the brain could form sentences, the body already knew how to resonate, to expand or contract, to feel safe or guarded, to approach or retreat. This primal intelligence is still active in you, and it's speaking on your behalf, all day, every day. The question is, do you know what it's saying? Every emotionally charged thought becomes a broadcast. Every belief held with conviction becomes a signal. Every expectation, whether hopeful or fearful, becomes an energetic request. And every time you hold on to resentment, to judgment, to old stories, you are repeating the same energetic instruction to the universe. Give me more of this. Not because you want it, but because energy doesn't hear your words. It feels your frequency. That's why you can say, I'm ready for love, while still attracting rejection. That's why you can affirm, I am safe, and still feel on edge. Because if the emotional signal behind your words is rooted in fear or lack, that's what gets amplified. Not your language, your vibration. You've probably noticed it before. You walk into a room, and without a single word you feel the atmosphere. You feel when someone is holding sadness behind a smile. You feel when someone's energy is tight, defensive, closed. You feel when someone's presence softens you, even if they say nothing at all. That's the real language. And that's the language the universe and everyone in it is fluent in. So how do you change what's being reflected back to you? Not by shouting affirmations, not by repeating empty phrases, but by shifting the signal, by adjusting the emotional tone of your internal world until it matches the experience you want to receive. You want more respect? Then speak respect, vibrationally. You want connection? Then let your frequency become safe, open, welcoming. You want change? Then become the change in tone, in energy, in resonance. This is not about pretending to be positive. It's about becoming coherent. Coherence isn't about being happy all the time. It's about alignment. It's about your thoughts, emotions, and intentions speaking the same vibrational language. When what you think aligns with what you feel, and what you feel aligns with what you believe is possible, you become a magnetic presence. You become someone the universe and everyone around you can understand with clarity. And in that clarity, things shift. People soften, circumstances realign, conversations change direction. Not because you forced it, but because you stopped sending mixed signals. You stopped vibrating from contradiction. You stopped asking for one thing while embodying another. You became readable. You became reliable. You became a clear signal in a noisy world. You may think people are ignoring you. They're not. They're responding to what they feel in your field. You may think the universe isn't listening. It is. It always is. But it can only echo back what you're broadcasting. So ask yourself, what message am I sending with my silence? What instruction am I giving with my tension? What request am I making with my resentment? Because the answers to those questions are written all over your life. You don't need to speak louder. You need to tune your signal. Because the universe isn't waiting for your words, it's waiting for your alignment. You can't change someone's behavior while remaining the same version of yourself who created that dynamic in the first place. This is where most attempts to shift relationships fall apart. We try to convince others, set ultimatums, rewrite the rules of engagement, all while staying emotionally anchored to the very identity that attracted that version of them to begin with. It's like trying to rearrange your reflection in the mirror by adjusting the glass instead of changing your expression. The glass isn't the problem, the projection is. Every interaction you have is based on energetic agreement. Not verbal, not contractual, vibrational. Who you are being, consciously or not, determines who others are allowed to be in your presence. If you're carrying insecurity, you'll tend to evoke superiority or condescension in others. If you're holding shame, you'll attract judgment. If you walk through the world feeling small, people will respond as if you're invisible, not because they choose to diminish you, but because that's the frequency you're using to announce yourself. This is not a punishment. This is coherence. The field always matches you. The universe doesn't operate on wishful thinking. It operates on resonance. And resonance doesn't care what you say you want. It responds to what you are. So when you shift who you're being, and not performatively but fundamentally, reality doesn't argue. It reorganizes. This is where identity work begins, not as a surface-level concept, but as a rewiring of your emotional foundation. To become someone who commands respect, you must first stop identifying as someone who tolerates disrespect. To receive warmth, you must stop expecting coldness. To call in a new version of someone else, you must first update the version of yourself that they've been mirroring. That means abandoning the inner dialogue that reinforces the old story. It means refusing to respond in ways that keep the old dynamic alive. It means imagining, feeling, and embodying a version of you who no longer resonates with that treatment so deeply, so consistently, that it no longer makes sense for the other person to behave that way around you. Not because they've changed, but because your presence no longer calls for that version of them to appear. This isn't theory, it's observable. You've seen it. You've felt the shift when someone walks into a room fully grounded in their energy and the atmosphere bends around them. You've noticed how some people are never disrespected, not because they're aggressive or defensive, but because their inner state makes it impossible. You've watched people soften in front of someone who radiates presence. That's not magic. That's identity alignment. It's the quiet power of someone who has chosen who they are and refuses to shrink, negotiate, or broadcast confusion. If you're still trying to get others to validate a version of you that you're not fully embodying yet, you'll keep receiving mixed signals. But the moment you stop trying to earn respect and start living as someone who naturally receives it, something shifts. People feel it. They don't know why they're treating you differently. They just do, because your frequency has changed. And frequencies govern behavior far more than logic or even intention. So ask yourself, am I trying to receive something I haven't fully become? Am I waiting for someone else to change before I give myself permission to? Am I still vibrating from an old version of me that no longer fits who I want to be? Because until you choose to become the person who naturally attracts the new behavior you desire, you'll be trapped in a loop, always reacting to the old script, never realizing that the pen was in your hand all along. You are not waiting for permission. You are not waiting for proof. You are not waiting for them. You are the one who decides when it ends, and it ends the moment you stop showing up as the character who needs to be treated that way. Emotion isn't just a reaction, it's a filter. It shapes what you see, how you interpret, what you attract, and what version of the world becomes available to you. You think you're looking at reality, but you're not. You're looking through your state, and your state is never neutral. When you're hurt, you see threats where there are none. When you're ashamed, even kindness can feel suspicious. When you're angry, every interaction becomes a potential confrontation. This is not a flaw in your perception. It's the architecture of it. Emotion doesn't just color the lens, it is the lens. This is why changing someone else's behavior from a wounded state almost never works. Because you're not responding to what's truly there. You're reacting to what your emotional filter allows you to perceive. And that filter is often shaped by old experiences, unresolved stories, and internalized identities that were never yours to begin with. As long as you carry those filters unchecked, you'll keep projecting them onto the people around you, and they'll unconsciously respond to those projections, fulfilling your deepest, often unconscious expectations. You can't see someone's kindness if you're still wearing the emotional armor built from betrayal. You can't receive respect if your nervous system is still scanning for rejection. You can't feel understood if you've already decided no one ever will. Not because others aren't offering these things, but because your emotional state doesn't recognize them as safe. That's how powerful the filter is. It doesn't just block perception, it edits reality. So the real work is not to beg for better behavior from others. The real work is to cleanse the lens through which you see them. That means locating where in your body you're still holding the past. It means identifying the emotions you've normalized. It means getting radically honest about what emotional reality you've been calling truth. Because until you shift that, you'll keep attracting the version of others that matches the version of yourself you haven't yet healed. This is the reason people keep reliving the same relationship with different faces. It's not because they're cursed, it's because their filter hasn't changed. Their story hasn't been rewritten. They're still looking for evidence that confirms what they unconsciously believe. That people can't be trusted, that love always ends in loss, that vulnerability is weakness, that closeness leads to pain. And what does the universe do with deeply held beliefs? It gives them form. It wraps them in skin. It delivers them in conversation. Because the universe doesn't operate on logic, it operates on frequency. But when you change the emotional filter, everything begins to look different. Not because the world has changed, but because you have. And now you're perceiving from clarity instead of distortion, from presence instead of protection, from curiosity instead of fear. Suddenly people become kinder, more open, more reflective of the version of you that is no longer carrying the same density. And here's the most powerful part. You don't have to fix the world for this to happen. You don't have to change them. You only have to stop feeding the filter. That means observing the emotion, honoring it, and then gently releasing it so it no longer defines your reality. That means feeling without attaching, witnessing without looping, allowing space for a new emotional baseline to emerge, one that's built on coherence, on regulation, on truth. Because when you begin to feel worthy, respected, calm, and safe internally, you start attracting people who mirror that state. Not because you convinced them to treat you differently, but because your presence has become a different invitation. And only those who resonate with that frequency will rise to meet you. The filter doesn't ask for permission. It simply colors everything you see. But once you learn to become the one who chooses the lens, instead of being ruled by it, you'll find that reality starts to soften. People show up differently, not because they're changing, but because you've stopped meeting them from the version of yourself that expected to be hurt. Emotion is powerful. It builds worlds, but it also builds prisons. And the key to freedom is not waiting for the outside to adjust. It's cleaning the lens, feeling clearly, choosing consciously, seeing again. There is a moment when you stop reacting, and that moment changes everything. Not because the other person has apologized, not because the situation has resolved, but because something inside you has shifted. You're no longer entangled, no longer looping, no longer offering your nervous system as a battlefield for an old dynamic. You've pulled your energy back, not in anger, not in punishment, but in clarity. That's the shift. The subtle yet seismic moment where you stop feeding the script that used to define your connection with someone. You stop needing to be right. You stop defending your pain. You stop anticipating their next move, and instead, you rest in the stillness of your own awareness. You feel the space between stimulus and response, and in that space, you find yourself again. Reaction is the glue that holds dysfunctional dynamics together. It reinforces the version of you that needed to protect, fight, prove, or chase. When you react, even with silence laced in resentment, you're still playing the game. You're still plugged into the emotional contract that says, I need you to be different so I can be okay. But when you let go of that contract, when you remove your emotional fuel, the pattern loses its power. The dance ends, not with a final word, but with your absence from the choreography. It's in this moment that reality starts to reorganize itself around your new signal, because your energy is no longer orbiting the same reactive frequency. You're no longer vibrating from fear, from scarcity, from unworthiness. You're rooted, aligned, present. And presence, true presence, disrupts old behavior like nothing else. The people around you feel it. Even if they can't name it, they feel the spaciousness in your energy, the absence of resistance, the clean silence that doesn't beg or punish, but simply is. You've seen this happen. Maybe you didn't understand it then, but now you can look back and recognize it. That one time you finally stopped chasing a reaction, and the other person softened. That one time you stopped explaining yourself and they listened. That one time you walked away not with bitterness, but with self-respect, and the whole relationship dynamic cracked open. These moments weren't coincidences. They were shifts in your state. You stopped participating in the version of yourself that was sustaining the old reality. This is not about emotional suppression. This is about emotional mastery. It's not about pretending you're unaffected. It's about becoming someone who no longer reacts from woundedness, who pauses long enough to see before responding, who breathes instead of bracing, who chooses instead of collapsing. Because in that choosing, in that pause, in that inner recalibration, the game changes. People may try to pull you back into the old pattern. They'll say things that used to trigger you. They'll act out the same roles because they haven't updated their script yet. But now you respond differently. Or you don't respond at all. You observe, you notice, and then you move. From presence, not from pain. And that presence is powerful. It speaks louder than any reaction ever could. It declares, I am no longer available for that version of reality. Over time, your relationships begin to reflect that. Either the people around you rise to meet you, or they fall away. Not as rejection, but as realignment. Because when you shift, the field around you must shift too. Reality doesn't have a choice. It must reflect the signal you are now sustaining. This is why the moment you stop reacting is not the moment you give up. It's the moment you take your power back. Not the power to control others, but the power to choose how you show up. The power to stop fighting for crumbs of respect and start radiating the version of you who no longer needs to beg for what they've already become. You are not here to argue your worth. You are not here to fix anyone's perception of you. You are here to embody the frequency that makes disrespect impossible. And that frequency begins the moment you stop being who you used to be, in response to who they still are. Every time you place your attention on something, you are casting a vote. And what you vote for, and with your focus, your emotion, your mental repetition, grows. Most people don't realize how expensive their attention is. They think it's passive, that they're simply observing the world, scrolling through moments, reacting to events. But attention is currency. And the moment you spend it, you're investing in something, not just in thoughts or feelings, but in energetic realities. You're voting for patterns, for people, for problems, for peace. You're saying, yes, more of this, and the field responds accordingly. This is why what you focus on expands, not because you asked for it directly, but because you emotionally endorsed it. You gave it time, you gave it thought, you gave it life. Even if you hated it, even if you were resisting it, you were still fueling it. Because the universe doesn't distinguish between what you want and what you despise. It responds to the intensity of your attention, not the preference behind it. And when you give something your emotional charge, positive or negative, you amplify its presence in your field. So when someone disrespects you and you obsess over it, you keep that frequency alive. When you replay the argument, when you imagine what you should have said, when you scan for similar moments in the past, you're not processing, you're programming. You're saying, this behavior is worth keeping in my reality. Not because you want it, but because you won't release it. And what you don't release, you reinforce. This is why ignoring is not avoidance. It's vibrational strategy, not denial, not repression, but redirection. You're not pretending it didn't happen. You're choosing not to fuel it anymore. You're choosing to reclaim your vote. To place your attention on something that matches who you're becoming, not who you were when that old behavior made sense. It's a radical form of self-respect. To become intentional about what you feed. To stop giving away your mental energy to dynamics that keep you locked in loops. To stop rewarding old versions of others with your emotional involvement. Because attention is not just power, it's permission. It tells the world what you're available for. If you keep responding to disrespect, you're teaching others how to access you. If you keep chasing clarity from someone who thrives in confusion, you're voting for more chaos. If you keep thinking about what's missing, what's broken, what's painful, you're reinforcing the blueprint of lack. You're affirming that these are the frequencies worthy of your focus. But when you shift your attention, even subtly, you begin to shift your field. You begin to starve the patterns that no longer serve you. You begin to notice what was always there, waiting for space to grow. The moments of respect, the hints of ease, the evidence of new dynamics trying to emerge through your new focus. It's not always instant. It doesn't always feel powerful at first, but the effects compound. Like votes counted in silence, the results are undeniable. The more you withhold your energy from what depletes you, the more space you create for what nourishes you, and the more you train your system to recognize what feels good, not just familiar. You've been taught that healing is dramatic, that change is loud, but some of the deepest transformations happen quietly, in the way you redirect your focus, in the thoughts you stop entertaining, in the reactions you no longer offer, in the silence that now replaces old tension. So ask yourself, what am I voting for right now with my attention? What behavior am I amplifying by replaying it in my mind? What version of myself am I strengthening by obsessing over this dynamic? And most importantly, what would I rather nourish? Because every second you spend rehearsing the old is a second you could be rehearsing the new, and the reality you practice internally is the one you begin to embody externally. Focus is not just awareness, it's authorship. Use it wisely. Repetition is not just a habit, it's a ritual. It's how you carve new grooves into reality. Most people misunderstand repetition. They think it's mechanical. They reduce it to affirmations spoken in the mirror or quotes scribbled in journals, hoping that the mere act of saying something over and over will somehow make it real. But true repetition, the kind that transforms your life, isn't about words. It's about being. It's about consistently showing up as a version of yourself that the world has no choice but to respond to differently. Every identity is sustained through repetition, not just verbal, but emotional, energetic, behavioral. The way you wake up, the way you carry your body, the tone you use when speaking to others, the thoughts that circle back in your head when you're not paying attention. These are not just routines, they're sacred rituals. They're signals you're constantly sending to the field saying, this is who I am now, this is what I accept, this is what I radiate. So when you want to change how someone treats you, the first step is not convincing them. It's not asking for different behavior. It's not repeating I am worthy once or twice and hoping they notice. It's about saturating your field with a new truth, over and over and over, until your very presence becomes saturated with it, until you walk differently, think differently, expect differently, until your nervous system no longer expects to be dismissed, until your posture no longer vibrates insecurity, until your eyes stop looking for rejection before connection can happen. This is what repetition really does. It re-educates your entire system to expect a new reality. And once you've rehearsed that new state long enough, it stops being performance. It becomes embodiment. And once it's embodied, others have no choice but to adapt. Because the script has changed, the energetic instructions they were unconsciously following have been overwritten. You don't have to shout to be heard in the field. You just have to be consistent. That consistency is the signal. That consistency is the magnet. That consistency is the authority. But it requires faith. Because the old story, the one you've repeated for years, will beg to be remembered. It will whisper, but this is how they've always been, this is how I've always felt, and nothing ever changes. That voice will try to pull you back into the familiar, because repetition doesn't just build, it also binds. And you've been bound to an identity that matched your old emotional state. That's why changing the external world starts with an internal mutiny, a quiet rebellion where you stop feeding the version of you that no longer aligns with who you're becoming. You stop rehearsing old arguments in your mind. You stop preparing for disappointment. You stop waiting for them to prove you right, and you begin proving a new self into existence. The ritual begins the moment you catch yourself mid-thought and choose a new one. The ritual begins when you feel the familiar urge to react, and instead you breathe and stay. The ritual begins when you wake up and remind your body how it feels to be respected, seen, loved, even before anyone outside has confirmed it. Repetition, done with presence, becomes a sacred act. It's not about control, it's about creation. You're not forcing anyone to change. You're simply making it impossible for them to continue relating to the old version of you, because that version is no longer showing up. And slowly, then suddenly, the world mirrors back your new state. A conversation softens, a gaze lingers, a behavior shifts, not because they finally listened, but because you finally changed the frequency they were tuning into. That's the power of embodied repetition. You become undeniable, not through demand, but through coherence, not through effort, but through energetic clarity. You become someone who doesn't need to be treated differently because you already are. Embodiment is the point where change stops being a theory and becomes a presence. A frequency, a new gravitational force. You can rehearse new thoughts, you can visualize new scenarios, you can even feel flashes of transformation, but nothing truly changes until your nervous system stabilizes in a new identity, until your body no longer flinches at the idea of being respected, until your voice no longer trembles at the thought of being heard, until your energy no longer apologizes for existing. That's embodiment, when the new you isn't something you visit, it's where you live. The world does not respond to your wishes. It responds to your coherence. When every part of you, thought, feeling, posture, gaze, aligns with a truth, that truth becomes magnetic. It radiates silently from you, and others pick up on it, not through words, not through confrontation, but through a shift in the field that surrounds you. This is why people suddenly start treating you differently when you've changed, even if you never said a word. They don't know why they feel more drawn to you, or why they're suddenly more respectful, more attentive, more curious. It's because you're no longer leaking mixed signals. You're no longer broadcasting confusion. You've become emotionally congruent. You've become clear, and clarity is power. You don't get there through force. You get there through frequency. Through the decision to embody, again and again, the state you desire to live in. Not because it's working in the moment, but because it's who you've decided to become. Think of the people who command a room without effort. They're not loud. They're not trying. They're just anchored. You feel their presence before they speak. That's the power of embodiment. It's not what you do. It's what you are. And when you become the frequency of dignity, love, certainty, or peace, others must recalibrate in your presence, not out of obedience, but because the field reorganizes around you. This is not manipulation, this is resonance. Just as a tuning fork causes another to vibrate when struck, your embodied state sends out ripples into the emotional landscape of others. And those who are still interacting with the old version of you, they won't be able to find it. That version no longer vibrates. It no longer echoes. It has gone silent. At first, they may test you, push old buttons, attempt old patterns, but when your nervous system no longer flinches, when your gaze remains calm, when your tone stays grounded, they're left with nothing to push against. That's when the shift begins. That's when their behavior starts looking for a new reference point, and you become that reference. You don't convince people to respect you. You embody a self that no longer tolerates anything less, and then observe as the world mirrors back the boundary you never had to verbalize. True embodiment is quiet. It doesn't need to explain itself. It doesn't need validation. It is its own proof. And when you reach that point, when the old self no longer pulls and the new self no longer shakes, you've crossed into a new reality, one where people show up differently not because they've changed, but because you did. You are the axis. Shift yourself, and everything orbits differently. You never needed to convince them. You never needed to change their mind. You never needed to gather evidence, plead your case, or wait for them to evolve. Because the moment you returned to yourself, fully, deeply, without apology, reality bent, people adjusted, patterns cracked, and a new gravity began to form around you. This is the truth most never grasp. Your relationships are not external. They are extensions of your state, mirrors, echoes, projections. Every rejection you tried to fix was just an invitation to stop abandoning yourself. Every cold shoulder was an arrow pointing back to your own warmth. Every dismissal was a distorted reflection of where you still withheld presence from your own soul. You've spent so much time trying to heal others, hoping they'd respond better. But all along, healing yourself was the recalibration that would make them respond differently. And not just them. Your body, your opportunities, your emotional environment, everything. Because consciousness doesn't operate in isolated compartments. It moves as a field, a wave, a current that touches all things at once. So when you shift, really shift, it's not just internal, it's not just emotional, it's informational. The entire field updates, and the characters inside your story receive new lines, new directions, new energies to align with. Not because you demanded it, but because your vibration gave them no other script to follow. That's the essence of transformation. You don't just change your thoughts, you become the thought. You don't just affirm a new reality, you live it with your breath, your posture, your silence. You become so congruent that life itself must rewrite around you. And this is where the path turns sacred, because you start realizing it was never about getting others to love you, respect you, hear you. It was about becoming the version of yourself who stopped begging for what they could never give you, and started embodying the truth that it was yours all along. So now, when someone treats you well, it's not a surprise, it's not a miracle, it's a match, a reflection, a recognition of the inner authority you finally claimed. And when someone doesn't, you don't panic, regress, or over-explain. You simply walk in your truth, knowing that frequency is non-negotiable. You are not the effect. You are the cause. You are not the character. You are the consciousness. You are not waiting for change. You are the change. And the moment you remember this, reality obeys. This is the quiet revolution, the sacred reorganization, the divine homecoming. And it starts with one choice: to become the frequency you've been searching for in everyone else. This is where the story ends, or rather, begins again. Not in reaction, but in creation. Not in resistance, but in remembrance. You are the axis. Shift yourself and everything orbits differently.